Hey there, guys, and welcome to another Factorio Friday Facts. I'm Xterminator, and today we're covering Friday Facts 305, the oil changes, and I'm joined again by Fiction.
Hello.
And, man, this one, so there's a part that has nothing to do with oil, which we'll cover here fairly quickly. It's good stuff here. The oil stuff, this is going to be a bit of a discussion, some pretty strong opinions. If you've been wanting an Xterm rant, you're gonna get one. So
And an affliction
yeah,
rant.
and an affliction rant, which you haven't really heard yet. So uh,
Yeah, I'm generally a pretty calm person.
yeah, yeah. I mean, it's gonna be fun. So strap yourselves in. Let's get going on this first part. So this is basically in a reference to mod GUIs. So like GUIs that mods add to the game. This is written by our seating, and to summarize most of this, basically there's some things that the GUIs do and don't do, and that some like misconceptions in regards to them being deterministic and stuff, and some common questions people have when starting modding and messing with GUIs is, why is a mod GUI part of the game state? Why do mod GUIs need to be deterministic? And how can I edit base game GUIs? And you can kind of see like a general example here of stuff. And then basically he just goes into, some explanations here, which essentially that the actual widgets are not part of the game state and are not deterministic. The part that mods have access to is basically. And kind of just
Yeah,
goes on.
the base GUIs are not part of the game state,
Correct.
whereas the mod GUIs are. And because the game state has to be deterministic to support multiplayer, the mod GUIs have to be deterministic as well.
Right. And then so then like one of the questions is how can I edit the base game GUIs? Um, and basically it's easier to explain that as a mod you can't. The base game GUIs are not implemented using the same system. They're just pure collections of widgets. Uh, so it kind of leaves a divide. They need to implement each widget type through the custom GUI system in order for mods to be able to use them. With this latest release, I finally figured out a way to do tab panes since they're special in how they work compared to everything else. Additionally, I figured out a semi-friendly way for mods to put things directly on the screen in a way that player can drag them around instead of being limited to some fixed area, which is really nice. Um, and then,
Yeah, and then there's also being able to position mod GUIs relative to the base game GUIs, which you currently can't do because the mods cannot access the base game GUIs at all. So they
right.
don't know where they are.
Yeah, so then this last thing just says that, where he's trying to work on a way to make it so you can be like, I want to add this GUI and I want it to be shown relative to the character GUI on the left side and stuff like that. And just lastly, for the new system, it needs to be easy to expand. Either automatically works with all new base game GUIs or works with minimal effort. Not break with simple refactoring. Not because other programmers trouble by existing. Not prevent base game GUIs from working how they need to work. So far, none of it seems impossible. I don't know when I'll have it working, but I'm looking forward to what mods will do with it. So that's all good. More mod support is always good.
Yeah, and our seating's on it, so he's going to figure it out.
Yeah, I trust him on that. Now, uh, oil. So I think we have a lot of thoughts. I think probably we should cover this entire thing maybe before we share our thoughts so
Yep.
people know what we're actually
Yeah.
referring to.
Let's
Yeah.
go through the whole thing. Yeah, go through the whole thing first, and then we'll talk about our thoughts.
Okay. So you want to like split this up? Maybe.
Yeah, I'll grab this section here. So, significant basic oil processing changes. A significant portion of you have voiced concerns about removing light and heavy oil from the outputs of basic oil processing, either about the change itself or that it does not fit because of some other factors. So, automating chemical science is a big step. And the chemical science pack uses solid fuel, and so we were concerned about the fact that this new basic processing was teaching you to use petroleum gas to create solid fuel when you really should be using light oil to create it because it's just so much more efficient to do it that way.
Right.
And then there's the complexity of the oil processing itself. And as they show in this next picture here, where they have the basic oil processing icon and then all the stuff that gets unlocked with that, they're saying that this is an overwhelming number of recipes that get unlocked just by researching green science stuff.
Right.
That's logistic science.
Yeah.
I'm used to calling it green science.
Yeah.
Chemical science is still blue science to me. And so because you have all this stuff, you end up exhausting all of your logistic science technology before you have your refinery set up. And they see this as a problem. So they're proposing the reason they made this change, or the reason they're planning to make this change, is to reduce the number of things that get unlocked at the basic oil processing level. So it gets limited to explosives, pump jacks for crude oil, plastic, petroleum, red circuits, sulfuric acid, batteries, solid fuel from petroleum, and sulfur.
Right.
And then once you prove that you have a refinery with basic oil processing, you can proceed to advanced oil processing with more outputs, more recipes. But because you already have the basics in play, pump jacks, oil transport, pipes, chemical plants, blah, 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 you only have to make changes to an existing refinery rather than set an entirely advanced new one up from scratch.
Right. And yeah, kind of going on. One of the ways you can look at Chemical Science Pack is blue, by the way. Is the players manage to set up a functional refinery. With this in mind, it fits very well to have them set up a rather basic and stuff before progress, like you said. So then you covered that. A lot of people voice their concerns about simplifying the game, but setting up advanced oil processing or coal liquefaction, which also has the same challenge of multiple outputs and using cracking, is still mandatory in order to launch the rocket. The learning curve is just smoother. All in all, they'd like to keep this change as we believe it has a positive impact on the game both for newer and veteran players. However, when discussing the change, we realize there are things that would make this change fit in the game much better.
Yeah. So the first of these changes, well, actually, let's back up a bit. The things that get unlocked by advanced oil processing are lubricant, heavy oil, heavy to light cracking, light to petroleum cracking, solid fuel from heavy and light, and rocket fuel.
Right.
So the use of light oil. Not many things use light oil in this game. The biggest one is solid fuel because it's the most efficient. But it's possible to produce solid fuel from heavy and from petroleum. So you can completely ignore light oil. So what they're doing to address that is they're adding light oil to the recipe for rocket fuel.
Right.
To kind of give you the hint that you should be using light oil to make solid fuel for rocket fuel.
Yeah. And they're also obviously then locking rocket fuel behind blue science tech.
Yes, this is pushing rocket fuel back behind blue science tech because you need light oil to make it, and light oil only comes from advanced oil processing, which is a blue science, chemical science tech.
Right.
Another reason they're doing this is because if they just left it as is, the only reason you would need to make advanced oil processing at all is lubricant, which is needed for electric engines, which is needed for the later science packs.
Yeah. So this is now kind of adding another reason to unlock advanced oil processing.
Yes.
And then kind of a more important question many people are asking is why even make solid fuel with the changes? This applies even more now that rocket fuel is behind advanced oil processing. one of the great things about the idea of adding solid fuel to a science pack was that it could be created from excess light oil that the player has no use for until unlocking advanced oil processing. Then it could easily be burned to get rid of it to keep the refinery working, but since basic oil processing has no excess byproducts anymore, every bit of petroleum gas is valuable. Therefore, producing solid fuel feels like a waste unless the player has a desperate lack of coal to burn. So now, chemical science pack change. Its chemical science is now going to require sulfur instead of solid fuel.
Yeah, which means that sulfur now has to leave your refinery.
Yes. Now, some people.
Because before, yeah, real quick, before the only thing sulfur was used for was explosives and sulfuric acid, both of which people tended to make at the refinery.
Yeah, which I was just going to say, some people would make batteries on their bus and then they would probably either bus it or more likely send sulfuric acid down. But now sulfur itself has to leave your refinery and be put on your bus unless, well, yeah, there's no unless you set up an oil production at Blue Science and then figure out something to do with all the other products.
Well, you won't have any other products if you're only doing sulfur, because you only get petroleum now.
Well, that's true,
So you
but
can use one refinery to make petroleum and convert all of that into sulfur.
yeah. So I mean, I guess that's an option, but um, so basically, unlocking the rocket launcher often feels like a big sidestep, mainly because it requires setting up explosive production while sulfur setup for the science pack. This is one step more convenient. A similar case occurs with tank and cannon shells later. So it's kind of just like
Yeah.
setting you up for some future stuff as well.
Yeah. I mean, this change, I guess I'm negative on this change specifically for the chemical science pack, but it's not a strong negative like it is for the rest of the changes.
Yeah, I have a bit of a negative for this, but cover that in a minute. To cover the last of the changes, robots behind chemical science pack. One of the obviously controversial changes from the last Rite of Facts was that worker robots would become gated behind chemical science pack. Our thought process behind this change was that you need to set up pretty much all of the oil refining recipes anyway, so it is not as much of a big jump as it seems. And they believe it has been a confusing trap. It has appeared as though logistics science pack tier technology, it has appeared as a logistics science pack tier technology, but in reality requires all the items that the next technological tier would expect you to have. And on top of that, worker robots are a good motivation and reward for unlocking chemical science pack, which does not have that many big shiny technologies behind it. With the change of putting sulfur in the chemical science pack recipe, worker robots are even closer to it, as all the items in the science pack directly contribute to getting robots.
In a way, yeah.
Yeah, so that one I'm not that much of a fan of, but out of all these, this is actually the one that I'm kind of least annoyed about. um,
Yeah,
it's
same
not
same
that
with me,
big.
but that's just my personal playstyle. I tend not to use bots on any of my bases until I have a power armor Mark II with uh, fission reactor.
Right. And then this second to last section, let's see. So basically, flamethrower ammo changed crude oil. So with heavy and light oil being behind blue science, flamethrower ammo needed to be moved as well or have its recipe changed. Rather hastily, we chose to change the recipe for petroleum gas instead of the oils, which does not make much sense, especially as a flamethrower turret can't take petroleum gas. After some of you pointed this out, it will be crude oil instead to make flamethrower ammo. Technically, you can already use the turret with crude oil barrels on the offensive, so making flamethrower ammo simpler is not a problem.
Yeah, I mean, you could already use crude oil for flamethrower turrets anyway. So
Yeah, makes sense. This one's pretty much fine to me.
yep,
And in the last section, they adjusted some numbers basically. So specifically, basic oil processing results in a bit more petroleum gas, 45 instead of 40. And advanced oil processing results in more heavy oil, 25 instead of 10, which is a pretty big increase. And this
Yeah.
was because it was common to use basic oil processing over advanced oil processing when you needed a lot of lubricant for express transport belts.
Yeah. But now you don't get heavy oil from basic, so they have to give you more from advanced.
Right. They're confident about these changes, but nothing is set in stone, so let us know what you think about them. We actually found a bug with the new block water input fluid box feature we added, so we won't release the changes until we have that sorted. And there's a mod where you can test these changes. So that's pretty much what's changing. Just very quickly, because it was a lot to just very quickly summarize. Basically, uh, basic oil processing now is only going to give you petroleum, and it's going to give you a little more than it used to, which is going to make it simpler in and of itself. And then you're not going to get as many things unlocked with it, which will be less confusing. It's an argument. And then solid fuel is going to rocket fuel is now going to be locked behind blue science and also require light oil to make in addition to solid fuel. And then the blue science pack is going to now require sulfur instead of solid fuel. And advanced oil processing is going to give you more heavy oil than it used to. And that's pretty much it. I mean, the bots are locked behind blue science, and then the flamethrower ammo change. But I think those are like the main changes here.
Yeah, those are the main changes. And these are the main changes from last week, essentially.
Yeah. So now, what do we think of these changes?
I don't like them because they're not addressing the core problem with oil processing. Well, first off, I put together a little document with my thoughts on it because I knew I wouldn't be able to remember everything.
Right.
So the things here, I linked to a few different forum posts, a couple from Bobbing About, who makes Bob's mods, and then Reika about the design philosophy of Factorio. And I kind of summarized it here. Factorio is about the puzzle that you need to solve. If you remove the puzzle from the game to try and appeal to the people who are turned off by puzzles, you're alienating the fans you already have who like the puzzle, while also not appealing to the people who don't like the puzzles because they just don't want to play a game about solving puzzles.
Right. Exactly.
Like, I see these, the goal of these changes was to continually get newer players into the game. But if they don't like the core design philosophy of your game to begin with, they're not going to play it. Like, for me, this is kind of a separate example with a different game, but Borderlands is a hugely popular game series. I never got into it because I just don't like that style of game. I tried playing it again this past week, and I couldn't get more than an hour and a half in because I just did not enjoy it.
Right. And
I don't think there's anything they could change that would make me enjoy it because I just don't like that style of game.
Exactly. So, and I mean, yeah, they're not entirely removing the puzzle. They're basically, and this is like kind of the devs' argument for their change, is they're not removing it. They're just moving it to quote unquote smooth out the learning curve. But the thing is, as I think Affliction you put in your document here somewhere, is that really all that's doing is just changing the point in the game where a new player would decide that they want to quit if this would be a trigger for them to quit playing to begin with. Like,
yeah, exactly. Like and this kind of segues into the real challenge of oil processing. On last week's Friday Facts, I think it was Bilka who posted his personal opinion, not an official dev opinion, because Bilka didn't work on this, but his personal opinion that the challenge of oil processing is because you have so many different things that you have to do all at once. And I disagree with that, because most of the posts that you'd find on the forums or on Reddit were not, how do I set up oil processing? The posts are, why is my refinery not working anymore? And that is the real challenge. The challenge is handling the multiple outputs of oil processing.
Right.
And with this change, they move that challenge from basic oil processing to advanced oil processing.
Yeah. And when I mentioned this to V, uh, his response was essentially that, and I'm paraphrasing here, of course, was that, uh, basically that they think it helps because doing this change because by the time the person gets to advanced oil processing and has to deal with these other fluids, that they will have already as kind of established knowledge by doing basic oil processing. But while that may have some truth to it and makes sense, I still don't think that's a very valid argument because it. I feel like just working with petroleum isn't really preparing you for having to work with two additional liquids and their byproducts and cracking. Because
Yeah. Like dealing with petroleum is supposed to teach you about dealing with liquids, but you already did that when you connected an offshore pump to your steam engines. You know how to transport liquids now.
right. And on top of this, something that I think, and I know you agree, is that something that I think is almost more severe than any of this, in my personal opinion, is that I feel like for a new player, or even for I mean, knowing these changes and having played the game before, I would just plan for it ahead. But as a new player, not knowing this stuff, I feel like they're actually making um, a possible point of frustration even more frustrating than it would currently be with how oil is right now before these changes take place. Because basically, what they're doing is they're going to give you basic oil processing. You only get petroleum. But unless you like really, as a new player, you're probably not going to do this unless you really look ahead at the next text and like look at exactly what you get from advanced oil and how everything works together from that. Then once you get advanced oil, all of a sudden your refinery is going to start outputting these two different liquids which you had not prepared for whatsoever, and you're likely going to have to either tear down and rebuild your entire refinery setup or just build a whole new one somewhere else to handle all those liquids while still working with the one you had before. And for me personally, if I were a new player, this would be far more frustrating to me than just having to work with them to begin with and setting it up properly from the get-go. Like, if I had built a system where I only got one liquid out and had built, like all my chemical plants around it and stuff, and then I unlock advanced oil, I'm like, oh, okay, cool, a new oil tech. And I do it, and it's like, well, shit, now nothing works because there's outputting two more liquids where I'd run all these other pipes and built stuff because I didn't know all this new stuff was coming. So I have to either tear up the entire thing and rebuild it or go build a whole nother refinery somewhere else to deal with these new liquids.
Yeah, and that's not to mention if you see that there's only one output on each side, or one input, one output, you might build your pipes just adjacent to the refinery and just have one long row of pipes with all your refineries. And then when you go to switch to advanced oil processing, you can't switch it because then you'd be connecting liquids of different types, and the game doesn't allow you to do that anymore.
Yeah, and it's going to spam you when you go to switch it. Can't mix liquids of different types. And I'm going to be, maybe I'm just really dumb, which is entirely possible. I'm going to be honest with you, even now, like when I'm working with mods and stuff that require different liquids, or even sometimes in vanilla, I will be confused because of that, where I will have like a pipe running or something and like go to turn something on or switch the recipe and it won't let me do it because it says you can't mix pipes. And for like, a few seconds, I'm like, what the hell? Why isn't this working? And that's as someone with tons of experience in the game. Imagine as a brand new player, you get that and you're like, what's happening? Why am I not allowed to switch this? Why would it be mixing fluids? There's like, it's because it won't even let you change it regardless of if you're outputting heavy or light oil at all, which you wouldn't be right away. It won't even let you change to that recipe, I believe.
Yeah, this is V's response from Reddit. You can't mix fluids at all anymore. It would not allow you to switch to such a recipe, which also needs to be communicated better, but that's a topic for another day. I disagree. That's a topic for today because it goes hand in hand with these changes.
Right. Like, that would be more confusing to me than just setting it up to begin with all the liquids. It's like, why the hell is this not letting me change the recipe when there are no other liquids here? Because at that point, there wouldn't
Yeah.
be any other liquids aside from just petroleum, which, again, it wouldn't even let you change to the new recipe to see what's happening.
Yeah.
Um,
Some other things here. So we've identified the challenge of oil as handling the multiple fluid outputs. Why not make a tutorial for it? They made tutorial for how to deal with trains, and the number of posts of why is my automated train network not working went down. It didn't go away completely, but the frequency of those posts went down because people learned in game how to set up train signals and such. Why not do something like that for oil processing and how to handle the multiple outputs?
yeah, like
A,
that would
a
be
tutorial in this case would be the solution to the problem, not messing up all these recipes and changing things around and causing a potentially bigger problem of having to tear up the whole thing and start over because you didn't know and couldn't plan ahead.
right. And I don't know. I feel like, yeah,
I mean,
it's
I know one of the biggest pieces of advice that we give people, give new players, is leave yourself room to expand. Uh, but even that doesn't necessarily apply here because it's not just you need room to expand. You need room to expand without mixing fluids.
right. Which, yeah, which is a very different thing than just leave X amount of spaces for new assemblers or something.
Yeah, it's not just that you need to produce more of the thing. You are producing entirely different things that come from the same building all of a sudden.
Right. And can't be within a certain proximity of the one thing you've already been producing this whole time. Otherwise, they're going to mix and not let you build it.
Yep.
Um, One other thing I want to touch on is back when they changed the Blue Science Pack recipes, I believe at the start of 017, to take solid fuel, I was a massive fan of that change because up until that point, solid fuel was basically useless until you had to build a rocket because literally the only thing it was actually needed for was rocket fuel. Sure, if you wanted to run your trains on it or burn them in your furnaces or whatever, then you could if you wanted to. And I was really happy because then it actually had another use. And now they've just completely undone all that because now that it takes sulfur, which the science taking sulfur in and of itself, I don't have a problem with, but the fact that it now doesn't take solid fuel basically makes solid fuel completely useless again for anything except making rocket fuel. Because it's like, I mean, it just doesn't, I mean, it is. It's just, I mean, sure, you could run your Steam setup on it and stuff, but the only thing it's actually needed for is rocket fuel.
Yeah, and I mean, I personally would start to mix in solid fuel with my coal line going to the boilers, but it's not required. Like I did that so I wouldn't have to go out and find a whole bunch more coal patches.
Right.
But yeah, I agree. The only thing that absolutely requires solid fuel now is rocket fuel.
Yeah.
And rocket fuel takes light oil now. That's another thing here. The ratio used to be 10 solid fuel to 1 rocket fuel. Now the ratio is 11 solid fuel to 1 rocket fuel because solid fuel comes from 10 light oil, and rocket fuel now requires 10 light oil and 10 solid fuel.
Yeah. Which is frustrating, along with the fact that now having to feed liquids with the, to be completely blunt, really, really awful fluid mechanics in the game. Uh, I mean, sure, it's just a straight pipe, but still, it's like another split or something you have to do. Now having to feed liquid into your rocket fuel producers, in my opinion, is completely unnecessary and really stupid. Like one it was so nice to be able to just make solid fuel in a chemical plant, stick an assembler next to it, and insert into it and make rocket fuel. Now you got to mess with these janky ass liquid mechanics, send the fuel or the light oil into your rocket fuel thing, and it's like it seems like a completely pointless change. The only reason they're doing this is so that you basically have something else to use light oil for, which
Yeah,
again
it
doesn't
feels
make
like it's a
sense.
knee-jerk change.
It
It's a knee-jerk change. There wasn't really much thought put into that. It was, oh, hey, something else needs to use light oil.
but it doesn't even
How
make
about rocket fuel?
it doesn't make sense because you already need light oil to make solid fuel for the rocket fuel. Like it doesn't
Yeah.
it's not a separate product. You are already using light oil for that end product. All you're doing is making them run extra pipes for more of the same product to make that same end product. Like it doesn't do anything.
And while we're on the subject of fluid mechanics, let's talk about megabases.
Yeah.
Megabases have to be UPS efficient. Like if you're building big enough, you need to consider UPS. With basic oil processing now only outputting sulfur, or not sulfur, but petroleum gas, there is no reason to use advanced oil processing for anything other than the little bit of lubricant you'll need.
Right.
And the solid fuel, obviously. But advanced oil processing now will not be used in megabases. You can just have a whole bunch of basic oil processing for your petroleum gas, and then you can have coal liquefaction because it gives you the least amount of petroleum to make all of your heavy and light oil. So now advanced oil processing is just not in megabases anymore.
Yeah, and I mean, I did see an argument or something from Covarex about advanced oil processing still being much more efficient, especially if you put in not UPS efficient, but like resource efficient, especially if you put productivity modules in it. And it's like, as a mega baser, while I like my extra productivity and efficiency, I'd prefer my UPS. So I'm still going to just use basic oil processing, a ton of it, to get tons of petroleum rather than screwing around with advanced oil to get a little bit extra by cracking and adding a bajillion extra fluid boxes to my game.
Yeah, so with advanced oil, you have to deal with 5 liquids. You have to deal with oil, which you're still going to need, water, heavy oil, light oil, and petroleum. With basic oil processing, you eliminate 3 of those 5. You only need to deal with the crude oil and the petroleum. So because you only have 2 fluids to worry about, you don't need to have all those extra pipes. You're just going to produce all this petroleum gas at a much lower UPS cost.
Well, yeah, not to mention the refineries themselves used for cracking, which have fluid boxes on them themselves.
Oh yeah, you're not going to need all those chemical plants for cracking. I think it was something like what was it, 1017 or something like that.
Yeah, something like that.
So now you went from 18 entities down to 7.
Yeah, and it may seem because I can already imagine the comments and people's thoughts are like, well, as mega basers, what's wrong with you? Why are you like advocating to make it harder for yourselves by like not having these changes and still having to do advanced oil processing? It's like it's not about that. It's about the fact that now a higher tech thing being advanced oil is going to be almost completely irrelevant in the latest game bases possible, which
Yeah,
to me makes no sense whatsoever.
It went from being the preferred way to process your oil to now just an obstacle to get over to launch your rocket.
Right. So, yeah, so there's that. Was there anything else?
Uh, there was one more paragraph in that, but we already covered it when we talked about the change to chemical science.
Right.
essentially now it's something that you have to bus instead of um, using it within the refinery to make the oil end products.
Yeah. So that's basically it. That's our thoughts. Maybe we're just really weird and everyone else likes this change, but I don't think so because I've talked to several other people who are as much or more against it than we are. Not to say this, obviously, this does not encompass the entire community, but um, it's. I don't like these. I think this is an awful. Like, putting myself into perspective as the last thing here, in the perspective of a new player, I vividly remember my first playthrough very clearly and my experience and thoughts and feelings during it. And never once during that time, when oil was basically how it is now in terms of, basic oil processing gives you the three liquids and stuff. Never once during setting up oil was I like, wow, this is way too complicated. I'm quitting the game. It was like, wow, this is a challenge, but it's pretty fun. And, it's kind of annoying at times, but I want to get this stuff set up. Like, I was never at a point where I was going to give up because it was too hard. And Affliction, you said to me, you were like, well, that's because you're the type of person the game appeals to and you like puzzles. And it's like, well, yes, exactly. If you're not that type of person, you're probably going to give up at some other part of Factorio anyway. And then also, as a new player, comparing my experience with how oil was compared to if oil is how they're proposing these changes, and I play the game as a new player again, I would probably be a lot closer to rage quitting if I had set up my thing with only petroleum and was all set and then unlocked advanced oil and couldn't use any of the stuff without tearing up my entire thing, like my entire refinery setup. That would piss me off a lot more and be a lot more frustrating than having to deal with the extra two liquids from the get-go.
Yeah, like I would prefer to get all of the complexity up front and be like, oh, wow, how am I going to set this up to begin with? Rather than getting the baby step of setting up a refinery and then finding out that I did it wrong when I unlocked the next tech.
Right, exactly. So,
Yeah, I I went through the majority of last week's forum thread in preparation for this. Um, the last comment from a dev was on Sunday morning my time, and the thread went on for another 18 pages after that with no dev responses.
wow. Jeez.
Yeah, and as of this recording right now, there's barely any responses on this week's thread, which is on page 6 right now. Yeah, it's still on page 6.
Yeah, so I don't know. That's our thoughts for what it's worth. We'd definitely be interested to see what you guys think um, in the comments, as always, and then share on the
Yep.
forums and Reddit. And
I'm
I don't know.
definitely going to be watching the comments on this video.
Yeah, me too, very closely. I always read the comments, but I'm going to be probably double reading them this time. And yeah, I'm interested. Anyway, I think that's going to do it. This one has been super long. And yeah, pretty interesting. So, any last thoughts?
Yeah, one of the last thoughts, I want to read a snippet of Bobbing About's post. He says, however, I'm not keen on the change to oil processing. Part of what you, Woob, have said in the past for not changing things is that they're a puzzle to be solved. By making this change, removing light and heavy oil to oil processing, you're removing the puzzle, something you've previously said you would not do. If you're changing your stance on this rule, does this mean that near-handed inserters and other such removes the puzzle elements will be added to the game soon?
I like it.
It might be a slippery slope. It might seem like a slippery slope, but it really isn't. This is something they said they wouldn't do in the past, and now they're doing it.
Yeah, to some degree. or at least
I
moving
mean,
it.
they're moving the puzzle, but that doesn't solve the problem they're trying to solve. That really boils down to my main issue with these changes. It's not solving the stated problem.
Yeah.
And in our opinion, it's making it worse.
Yeah, exactly. So there you go, guys. There's the thoughts. Leave yours below on the forums and Reddit. And until next time, we will see you later.
Yeah, see ya.